When I was just about 10 years old, a book came out called Bad as I Wanna Be. It was written by Dennis Rodman, one of the bad boys of the NBA. He had been for quite some time. And when his reach got to its pinnacle, he wrote a book called Bad as I Wanna Be. I was a kid, and I remember thinking, well, if you wanted to be bad, I guess being as bad as you wanted to be would make sense because being bad, you wouldn't really care what other people thought about it. And that was an innocent type of thought, but I think it was quite flawed because I think that if you want to be anything, any type of anything, you should not care what other people think of it. We have those sentiments here from Emily Dickinson in today's poem. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear, of course, in three separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now cruising towards 700 videos strong. Number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated to the greatest poet of all time. And number three being 30 must-read poems, 30 videos whereby what we will do is break things down into three sections. Each video will have a quick biography on the writer in question, a recap of the type of things that writer writes, and finally an analysis on the poem itself. So, who was Emily Dickinson?
Emily Elizabeth Dickinson, the reclusive and enigmatic poet, was born December 10, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts. For reference, this was the same year that the Church of Latter-day Saints was born and King George IV died. Ironically, in contrast with Emily's misanthropic propensities, her family was distinguished in the community. Notably, her father, Edward, was a lawyer and a trustee at Amherst College, a college her grandfather, Samuel, had had a hand in founding. But if her family name and her father loomed large in the community, Edward was inescapable in her life. Of her father, Emily said, "His heart was pure and terrible, and I think no other like it exists." Still, she respected him, even if her literary and intellectual proclivities were pursued in rebellion. If her father ran hot, it seems it was something she could understand, if not admire. Her relationship with her mother was colder. Emily Norcross Dickinson was said to be melancholic, and might today be described as depressive. Of her mother, Emily said, "She was an awful mother, but I liked her better than none." Far from a five-star review, but we can recognize the signatures of both temperatures in her poetry. At 17 years old, Emily began attending Mary Lyons Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. She would attend the seminary all the way until May of the next year. The reasons for her leaving depend on who is relaying them. Whatever the reasons, like many geniuses, she did not finish her foray into post-secondary education. Shortly thereafter, Dickinson's relationship with Susan Gilbert would blossom and be further solidified in 1853 when Gilbert was engaged to Austin Dickinson, Emily's brother. Susan would then become Susan Gilbert Dickinson in 1856. During this same decade, Emily would embark on an introspective odyssey that would transform American letters and poetry altogether. The years from 1858 to 1865 are referred to as the writing years by Dickinson scholars. During this period, she wrote hundreds of poems, and by the end of this period, she had written over 1,100 of her 1,789 known poems. But she would end this period in her cousin's care after receiving treatment for what is now believed to have been iritis, an inflammation of the muscles in her eyes. If the humanitarian burden of writing 1,000 of the greatest poems to ever exist was not toilsome enough to cause her complete withdrawal, loss would be. Part of her instructions in order that she would keep her eyesight was that she had to stop reading. Emily Dickinson also struggled mightily to deal with death, and losing people who were important to her devastated her more each time it happened. During this period, she had remarked that before she could recover from one loss, she had lost someone else. And with hundreds of the greatest poems to ever be written still inside her mind, Emily Dickinson became the woman in white, dressing completely in white, never leaving her family's property, and even preferring to speak to people through the closed door to her bedroom. Emily Dickinson would publish only 10 poems during her lifetime. All of them were published without attribution. On May 15th, 1886, Emily Dickinson died after more than 2 years of battling what was known as Bright's disease, a type of kidney disease. Her final words were, "I must go in. The fog is rising." And in order to begin properly, it's important to start with the question, what kind of poetry did Emily Dickinson write? Well, Emily Dickinson was rare even amongst geniuses. And as is often the case with the uncommon amongst uncommon people, there is no way to pinpoint her, though her poetry is often described as lyric, romantic, and transcendental. So what do these words mean? Lyric poetry refers to a short poem, often with song-like qualities, that expresses the speaker's personal emotions and feelings. Historically intended to be sung and accompany musical instrumentation, lyric now describes a broad category of non-narrative poetry, including elegies, odes, and sonnets. Romantic poetry is a poetic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries that turned toward nature and the interior world of feeling in opposition to the mannered formalism and disciplined scientific inquiry of the Enlightenment era that preceded it. English poets such as William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Blake, and Lord Byron produced work that expressed spontaneous feelings, found parallels to their own emotional lives in the natural world, and celebrated creativity rather than logic. And finally, transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is an American literary, philosophical, religious, and political movement of the early 19th century centered around Ralph Waldo Emerson. Other important transcendentalists were Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Lydia Marie Child, Amos Bronson Alcott, Frederick Henry Hedge, Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, and Theodore Parker. Stimulated by English and German Romanticism, the biblical criticism of Herder and Schleiermacher, and the skepticism of Hume, the Transcendentalists operated with the sense that a new era was at hand. They were critics of their contemporary society for its unthinking conformity, and urged that each person find in Emerson's words, quote, an original relation to the universe, end quote. Emerson and Thoreau sought this relation in solitude amidst nature, and in their writing, By the 1840s, they, along with other transcendentalists, were engaged in the social experiments of Brook Farm, Fruitlands, and Walden, and by the 1850s, an increasingly urgent critique of American slavery. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now, and they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools. I've finished threading, too. Baptized before, without the choice, but this time consciously, of grace unto supremest name, called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank, too small the first, crowned, crowning on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject. And I choose just a crown.
One of the things that is precious to me in life, one of the things that I hope to perpetuate in my life, is the sort of constant strain towards individuality. I think that individuality is one of the ultimate triumphs of human character. Each one of us gets to be indelibly who it is that we are, regardless of what anyone else thinks, regardless of how anyone else feels about who it is that we are. And we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the churning generations that came before us, that thrust us into reality, to be authentically us, to be authentically we. And this poem is one that always reminds me of that. And it reminds me of that with a sort of almost hellfire and brimstone approach. So, what am I talking about here? Let's start here with stanza one. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. I'm seated. I have separated. I've stopped being theirs. Now, this is kind of the same statement as I'm seated, but it implies more heavily a them involved here. I'm seated could mean any number of things. I moved out of the house. I've taken a new name. I've broken up with my bridge club, whatever that is. I've stopped being theirs implies something very different. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. This calls into question two things. It calls into question family because this is baptism. This is the act of being baptized. Your family has you baptized, but you were also baptized into a religion. So, both of these things at this point can be the theirs in question. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. So, what does this suggest? This part of the poem is talking about I'm grown now. I'm an adult now. So, what it's suggesting, in contrast with the first half of this stanza, is that because I'm grown, I am separating from my family and my religion. My individuality begins where their hold of me ends. Then we go forward. Baptized before without the choice. So, this baptism by family into religion, I didn't have the choice over that. But this time, okay, so we're going through another baptism consciously. Because I am an adult, I have found this new baptism and said, I'll have that, please. Of grace. Now, this could mean a couple things. This could just mean you, the church and the family, were not forgiving, did not offer grace. I have decided that I am going to, and because I am going to, that separates me from you. I have to cede from you to offer grace. Grace is also something that is often associated with royalty. Your grace, her grace. So, we go a little bit further and we get some answers. Unto supremest name, consciously of grace, unto supremest name. Is that God? Called to my full, the crescent dropped. I was called to be royalty, and the crescent dropped on my head. Existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. The moment that crown was put upon my head, my destiny was full. What are we talking about? My second rank too small the first. My second rank, I'm talking about my new rank, my new standing as queen, as king. Too small the first. That baptism in the church, that baptism with my family, that was too small for me. My second rank is where I'm talking now. Crowning on my father's breast, and a half unconscious queen. Before I put this on, I was still royalty, but I was half unconscious on my father's breast. I was depending upon my father, and I did not stand to my full height. But this time, adequate, erect. This time I have stood to full height, with will to choose or to reject. Because I am my own person, because I am who I am, because I have decided to be an adult and stand on my own, because I have decided to cede, I get to choose or to reject. And I choose just a crown. I have chosen to leave behind that family. I have chosen to leave behind that church. I have chosen to adopt an identity of just the queen, baby. Now, what is the queen? I think that being the queen, having the crown, is associated um, not just with individuality. So we have to ask, why the image of baptism? Baptism, when you were baptized into being a subject. You were baptized essentially into service. To wear a crown is to be sovereign. To wear a crown is to be the one who does decide. To wear a crown is to be the one who is important, not to serve, but to wear the crown is to be the one. So I think that what we're doing here with this poem is saying, I have chosen to be my own person, and because of that, I have to leave behind my family. Because of that, I have to leave behind this church. But simply in standing as an individual, I am sovereign. Not just sovereign in the way that an individual is sovereign, but sovereign in the way that a state is sovereign on the world scale. That's important. That is recognition of the individuality as a state unto itself. Now, We don't have really any of the details from Emily Dickinson's life that would allow us to pinpoint exactly what this poem is about. And I think that's for the best. We don't need it, right? Maybe Emily Dickinson here is making an argument because her mother told her to clean off the table, right? Could be something so simple as that. I don't care. There is such immense wisdom in this poem that I'm glad I can't point to an actual moment in Emily Dickinson's life when this poem was realized, when this poem was expressed. And it's so ironically wonderful that this poem does come to us from Emily Dickinson. Harold Bloom, very tough literary critic, even suggests that there are few poets as original as Emily Dickinson. He says, I believe it's down to Emily Dickinson and Shakespeare. Those are the two originals. Those are the two that say, I won't take any of the mold. I'll just give you what I've got. Thank you very much. And he might be right. This poem, coming therefore from Emily Dickinson, is not just a poem. It is proof itself that individuality can earn you greatness. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. There is poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.